I just settled down to my morning coffee and an extreme Sudoku when my phone rang. I always do one of the puzzles before work to limber up my mind, and I'd gotten so accustomed to the exercise that I did it even on the days when I wasn't working. I guess you could say that solving puzzles is my profession. The group I'm in gets suspicious computer code from various sources, and we have to figure out what it does, where it came from, and how to counteract it. That kind of work suits me fine. I'm a bit of a nerd and I like solving puzzles. If someone wants to pay me to do it, so much the better. Anyway, the display on my cell phone told me it was my boss calling. I uttered a curse when I saw that. The last thing I wanted was a call from the office over the Christmas break. But when the boss calls, I answer. He was all business. No, hello, how are you? No Christmas or New Year's wishes. All he said was, I need you in the office right now, Thomas. For real? I whined. It's the day after Christmas. It's a matter of national security, Thomas, so you need to get moving. I shook my head in disgust and hastily scribbled a note to Ginny to let her know where I was in case she came home and found the house empty. She'd gone over to be with one of her girlfriends who was going through a bad breakup. I thought that was a lot to ask of her, especially during the holidays, but that was Ginny, always looking out for her friends. It was one of the qualities that endeared her to me. After I'd written the note and gotten on my heavy coat, I piled into my car and headed out toward the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. What can be so damned important at this time of year? I wondered, but when the boss said, national security, you really couldn't question it. And he probably wasn't exaggerating for effect, or at least I didn't think he was. You see, we work for the NSA, the National Security Agency, and we deal with national security issues all the time. As I headed toward Fort Meade, where the NSA is headquartered, I wondered if my boss's emergency had anything to do with the project I'd been working on. 3 or 4 weeks ago, he'd sent me a doozy of a puzzle to solve, a lengthy piece of code that didn't seem to do anything. It appeared to be a worm, a nasty form of virus that infects computers and makes them do things you don't want them doing. But this code turned up its nose at everything we plugged it into, so we hadn't a clue what it was supposed to do if it did find its target. I love puzzles like that. I love matching wits with some hacker who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. He'd fooled us so far, I had to admit, but I felt like we were closing in on him, and soon we'd crack the code. When I got checked in through security, they told me to go straight to my boss's office, something I rarely did. When I got there, I found him talking in low tones to his director. If you're enjoying my content, consider joining my Patreon community. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to full parts of my videos much earlier than everyone else. Plus, you'll be supporting me to create even more awesome content for you. Check out the link in the description to join now. This was definitely outside the norm. Ben, my manager, was clearly uneasy about something. He hemmed and hawed for a little while, then looked at his director and shrugged. Turning back to me, he said, Thomas, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to spit it out. Your wife is having an affair. I had had no clue why he had called me in. This announcement was about the last thing in the world I could have imagined, and it felt like a knife stabbing me in the chest. No, I yelled, jumping to my feet. That's a lie. How can you say such a terrible thing? He had pulled back from his desk when I jumped up, but after he realized that I wasn't going to assault him, he settled back in his chair and looked over to his director for help. The director stood up and began to pace around behind Ben. Thomas, I know this comes as a shock, but it happens all the time. You've got to face it like a man. No, I don't, I said angrily, because it isn't true. You're wrong. You've made a mistake. The two of them looked at each other, and then the director shrugged his shoulders. We didn't want to get into the gory details, but I guess there's no other way to convince you. He gave a signal to Ben, who began calling up a file on his computer. The director went on. This call was actually recorded on Christmas Eve, but because of the holidays, we didn't get around to analyzing it until early this morning. After we heard it, Ben called you to come in. He nodded at Ben, who had the file ready to play. Then he looked at me again. You better sit down to hear this. Ben clicked his mouse and Ginny's voice filled the room. Between the quality of the cell phone she was using and the computer playback, the sound fidelity wasn't high, but there was no mistaking whose voice I was listening to. I hate it that we can't be together these next 2 days, she said in a tone of voice I hadn't heard in a long time. What's the matter, baby? Didn't I give you enough loving to tide you over last time? A male voice asked. No, never, she said with passion. Making love to you has just the opposite effect. Every time I wind up wanting even more. You're like a drug to me. I thought for a second that I was going to be sick. Ben shot me an anxious glance and gestured toward the computer, offering to shut off the recording. But I waved him away. I had to hear it. The man's recorded laugh startled and enraged me. When do you think we get together again? He asked. Well, Christmas Day is definitely out, Jenny's voice said. But I'll find a way to get out of the house the next day. I'll tell Thomas my girlfriend has the blues and needs comforting. That always works on him. That little revelation made me grind my teeth. What would you want me to do to you if we could be together now? The man's voice asked teasingly. Jenny's voice grew huskier. If you were here now, I'd want you to play with my chest. I'd want you to bite them until they're about to burst. Then what? Oh, baby, I'd like you to stick your... And then, he asked suggestively, I'd like you to rub. Turn it off. I yelled, startling Ben. To hear her talking like some sort of crazed to another man was simply more than I could bear. My Jenny, the woman I'd loved and worshipped, had betrayed me. Without that recording, I would never have believed it. Having to listen to it in front of my boss and his director made the whole thing just that much more humiliating. I closed my eyes, wishing I could crawl under the desk and hide. Ben looked at me with concern. Are you all right, Thomas? Can I get you anything? No, I said quietly, shaking my head, still trying to process what I just learned. Just give me a minute. I'll be all right. Then a thought popped into my head and my pain turned into anger. Wait a minute. What were you doing tapping my wife's phone calls? You had no right to do that. The director stepped forward, his hands held up placatingly. Things are not that simple, Thomas. I interrupted him. Yes, they are that simple. You had my wife under surveillance. She's a citizen, and she doesn't even work for the government. You had no right to do that. Thomas, we didn't have Ginny under surveillance. Our computer got a hit on the voice pattern of her, partner, and that's why we grabbed the conversation. I looked at him and shook my head in confusion. The director ran his hand through his graying hair. Thomas, I don't know how to tell you this, but your wife's lover is on our terrorist watch list. We think he's an agent. These days it's hard to tell them apart. I thought I'd already had the worst shock of my life. Now I realize that conclusion was premature. Ginny may be a cheater, but she isn't a terrorist. I gasped. She'd never helped those people. When the news about the latest terror attack came out, she was outraged. We talked about it several times. Relax, Thomas. No one thinks Ginny is directly involved with any terrorist organization. We think this fellow targeted her. At first I felt a little better. It wasn't Ginny's fault. Some Middle Eastern James Bond had set out to seduce her. But I couldn't get around the fact that she'd given in to him. Why was she seeing this guy? Why was she flirting with anyone but me? I thought we had a strong marriage. When did she stop loving me? But I put that problem aside to try to comprehend everything else I'd just been told. I don't understand. Why would some T group target Ginny? It doesn't make any sense. Ben gripped my shoulder. Think about it, Thomas. They don't care about Ginny. They want to use her to get close to you. Me? Why would anybody want to get close to me? We can't be sure, but we think they want to use Ginny to get to you, and to use you to gain information about the NSA. It's the only thing that makes sense. I slumped in my chair and glanced idly around the office as if something there might make sense of this madness. I spotted a Christmas wreath hanging from Ben's window, and the sight seemed incongruous to me. Christmas was a thing of the past now, in more ways than one. I didn't think there would ever be peace on earth, goodwill to men, for me again. Ben's director put both hands on the desk and leaned over to peer at me. Thomas, I have to ask you an important question now. I stared at him blankly. Thomas, can you face Ginny tonight and pretend like none of this happened? Can you act like you're unaware of everything you've just learned? I looked at him like he was crazy. Not a chance, I said flatly. He glanced at Ben. That's what I thought, he said. I know I wouldn't be able to if the situation was reversed. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to send you out of town for a few days, get you out of the line of fire until we can have a handle on exactly what's going on. What's the problem? I demanded hotly. Just go pick the bastard up and interrogate him. If you need somebody to waterboard him, I'll be glad to volunteer, I added. The two of them glanced at each other. That's the thing, Thomas. Amir has disappeared, and he may have left Washington. In any case, his cell phone signal is off the air, and he's not in the apartment where he was living. A thought struck me, and after what I just learned it felt strange to ask, but I did anyway. What about Ginny? Is she in danger? I don't think so, the director said. She wasn't Amir's real target, only a means to an end. But don't worry, the FBI will keep a close eye on her. I felt a little better. What Ginny had done had left a gaping wound in me, but I still couldn't bring myself to want any harm to come to her. I'd cared too deeply for her too long. I just couldn't turn that off on such short notice.